We're here to talk about Swiss matchup generation, and this is for the fall split because it's more important there, but I guess technically it'll happen all the time because every qualifier for every event will have some type of Swiss. We're going to talk about the specifics of the Swiss that we have coming up for to just make fall regional 1. Obviously there's, I wouldn't say controversy, but some thoughts about who should be top 16 or not, and I didn't work on that, so hey, don't blame me. If you're mad. One, I think it's not terrible that there could be one or two teams maybe in or out, but at the end of the day, if you're a 14, a 15, 16, 17, 18 seed, the 14 through 16 are going to be happy they're there, but at the same time, they're very likely going to lose. But hey, who knows? Maybe they'll win. But I didn't make that call. So let's talk about I'm trying to bring up the Wikipedia for the season so we can go over there real quick when we get to the qualifiers. We'll go North America. Right, we're in North America. We'll go to the invitational qualifier. Okay, so first let's just talk about what we're doing. It is different, Swiss, for the matchups compared to last year. Last year was more RNG based. Personally, I like RNG in Swiss because I think that's kind of the point of Swiss, or maybe not the point, but that's how I picture Swiss. Is there's some elements of randomness in there, so you get more varied matchups. But that's changing around just a little bit. So let's get into it. We'll just go right into what round 1 is. So round 1 is just seed number 1 versus the bottom seed. Seed number, who is it? Is it the Pioneers in this one versus Energy? Yeah, Pioneers. 16 seed of Pioneers will play the number 1 seed of Energy. 2 seed, I actually don't know the seeds offhand. We'll just say Envy, but I think they're 3 seed. But so on and so forth. 1 seed versus 16, 2 versus 15, 3 versus 14 for round 1. We used to do, if you were in the group of 4, top 4, you would play one of the teams from the bottom 4. So 13 through 16. That is no longer the case. So that is how that is working. So that means whoever does the 1 through 16, all right, here's where they're actually seated is it's more important now than it was, I think, in the old system. So I think as the fall split goes on, it'll be more accurate. But this first one obviously is going to be you just had to hope they liked you where they wanted to put your seed. But at the end of the day, there is ways to grow out of that seed, which is the most important part, in my opinion, is you have to grow out of the seed. So let's just get into it. So let's talk about the rules for the matchup. So round 1 is easy. High seed versus lowest seed, so on and so forth. That will take place in every single round where if you're a 1-0 team and you're the high seed, you play the lowest seeded team. Now, how do we determine those seeds is what's most important to determine what the matchups are. It'll be performance-based. So first, there's 3 tiebreakers to determine what your seed is going into the following round. So in the past, it was if you were, say, one of the top 4 seeds, you would play one of the bottom 4 seeds in round 2 if you were a 1-0 team. Now it's going to be based on what you actually do in round 1 and then where you will play. So in round 1, say you win 3-0. You're going to be one of the top seeds. Now, there'll probably be other teams that also win 3-0. So if that is the case, it goes back to where you started. Say you were seed 5 and then seed number 1, they also 3-0. Well, you would be now the 2 seed going into the next round because the 1 seed will hold their seed. So it is performance-based. Now, there's good and bad with that. The good is now you control your own destiny even more. And if you are a lower seed, you actually have more control over what you do. If you're a high seed, you still have a lot of control over what you do. You just have to make sure you do your 3-0s. The downside is without the element of the top seeds, say a number 1 seed lost in round 1. In round 2, they would be in the upper half of their 0-1 bracket. And then they would play a bottom 0-1 team. Now, instead, if they get swept, they could be last seed going into round number 2. And if another good team loses in 5, 2 good teams could meet up in that 0-1 round. It's more rare, but also it's also based on your performance. So if they don't perform well, then it is what it is. So that's how that is based. So it's all performance based. And again, the way you seed is based on 3 criteria. First is upper side or lower side of where'd you come from. So let's take the 1-1 round, round 3. You'll have 4 teams that come from the 1-0 round that just lost. They will be seeded 1 through 4. That'll be based on game differential first. Then it'll be based on where they began the day at. So say they were seed 4. They go 3-1. They have a +2 game differential. Seed 3 also goes +2. Seed 3 would be higher than seed 4. Say those were the 2 top teams. So they would be seeds 1 and 2 in that 1-1 round. But basically, you take those 4, you take their game differential. And again, that could be varied because it's a 1-1 round, right? So you could have had a team that squeaked by in round 1 where they lost or they won 3-2, then they got swept. They could be -2 game differential. They can't fall below the teams that were 0-1. So say there was an 0-1 team that lost in 5, and then they swept someone. So they're +2 game differential. They will be, so they can't go higher than anyone from the 1-0 round. So even if the 1-0 team that is now 1-1 is -2 game differential, they'll be seated higher than a team that came from the 0-1 round who is now +2 game differential. So seed 5 and seed 4, basically. So seed 4 would go to the -2 game differential. Seed 5 would go to the +2 game differential team. So it keeps it kind of like the upper bracket, lower bracket style of like a normal bracket, where you drop down and you face someone from the opposite side. Now, that's not always the case because if a high seed, say the 1 seed, has already played the lowest seed, it then goes until they find an opponent. So there could be times where like a 4 and 5 seed could play each other. Like I think like early rounds that probably wouldn't happen, but it could happen later. So just keep that in mind. So that'll continue throughout the entire thing. So it's pretty simple. It's all performance based now. There's no RNG elements. There is, I would say, the protection as a higher seed kind of is gone compared to the RNG style, where they were still protected a bit. Say you went into the round 4 in the 2-1 round. We would always bring like the highest seeded team that came from the 1-1 round, and that's the highest seeded when they began the day. They would then move up into that upper bracket. That's no longer the case anymore. It's all game differential based. So it'll just be the highest game differential team in that 1-1 round will then move up into like a top 3 seed, right? And then they'll very likely play the 4 seed that was also 1-1 that also did fairly well. So they'll avoid the 2 teams that came from the 2-0 round, if that makes sense. So it's all performance based. We'll get some more, so I wouldn't say varied matchups, but we could get some really weird matchups like early on. And then it's up to teams. Like round 1 is so important now, because if you do go 0-3, not only are you in the lower bracket, your game differential is also -3. So you have to make up so much ground. So I think round 1, very, very important, which is also why round 1 is now 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, 3 versus 14, to make that one a little bit more, of a normal playing field of like where you're seated is where you come in. So that first round going to be very important because it's going to determine who you're playing through most of this. Obviously, there's still going to be weird results. There's still going to be random matchups, basically, or what feels like random matchups, but it'll all be performance-based. So one thing to note is it goes to game differential, and then if that is tied, and there will be a lot of ties in game differential, goes back to where you began the day. It's not on goal difference, so you don't have to worry about goals or anything like that. You just go in on game differential, and if you're tied, if you're seed 16, well, you're going to lose every single tiebreaker. So just keep that in mind, and then you will play the highest seed. Like if you are the lowest seed, you'll play the highest seed that you haven't played yet, and it'll continue on down the line. The only rule that still applies, obviously, no rematches throughout, so just keep that in mind. So if a high seed has played the bottom 2 teams already, they'll then play the 3rd worst team, so on and so forth. So each team will be seeded based on that. And that's basically it. Like, I could do some writing out stuff, but I don't even think we really need to. So let's bring in the bracket here of what we have going on. And if anyone has any questions, feel free. Like, I didn't probably explain it perfectly, but that's why we throw text on the screen so people can see it. But yeah. People are where's the 1-0 teams. Oh yes, so stacks like 1-0 teams will still always play 1-0 teams. That is just how that always works. So you will always play a team with the same win-loss record, but who you play will be based on performance-based game differential of where you're seated, also what round you came from prior. So again, if we look over here into this little image, I don't know if this will zoom in. So this will kind of show it pretty well. So in round 3, we have 4 2-0 teams. 2 of those teams obviously will go 3-0, and they are through, so you don't have to worry about that. 2 of those teams will drop to 2-1. No matter what, those are seeds 1 and 2 when we get into this 2-1 round, because they came from the upper bracket, we'll say. So they will be seeded 1 and 2 based on game differential. And then from there on, these 1-1 teams, so we'll have 4 teams go 2-1. 4 teams go 1 and 2. So the 4 teams that go 2 and 1, they will move up based on game differential. Will then be in here as 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if you have a good game differential, you're going to avoid one of those 2-0 teams who are now 2 and 1, and you'll play one of those 1-1 teams. Unless, of course, a rematch has happened already, then you might be thrown around a little bit more. So again, all performance-based, but that's probably the most important round. That's where the protection kind of goes away from the old-style system, so that used to be if you were just a high seed, say you're like the 2 seed, and the 1 seed's already through, 3-0. But you had a rough beginning of the day. But if you come through the 1-1 round and go 2-1, you would actually get an upper half seed and then have a random draw of the bottom half team. So again, there is no random draws anymore. It's all performance based. But so that protection is now gone. So if you are a higher seeded team and you lose early and your game differential isn't that great, that's what it comes down to, game differential at this point. You have some protections, obviously, with teams that are tied with you in game differential, but like as we go later on throughout the tournament, like around 4, there'll probably be more teams that are not tied anymore, right? Because there's been more matches played. But in, say, round 2, we're probably going to have a lot of ties, right? Because there's only 3 results that can possibly happen. A 3-0, a 3-1, or a 3-2. So these teams are definitely will be tied here. So that's where, like, if you're seeded high and you make it through, it's going to help, and you're going to win some of those tiebreakers and have a higher seed going into that 1-0 matchup, or even an 0-1 matchup. Like if you're a high seed and you fall down early, you will at least very likely have a high seed going into that 0-1, as long as you don't get swept, probably, because you'll win the tiebreakers with whoever tied with you in game differential. So that's how that all works out. We go down to 2-1, then we get to 2-2, and 2-2 is where it can get kind of crazy, where we can have a lot of rematches, and sometimes like you throw the seeds completely out the window because there's only like one perfect matchup left or something like that. But we will try to do high seed first versus the lowest seed possible, and you move on up throughout the list. And again, those 2-2 teams, if you come from the 2-1 round, you'll be seeds 1 through 3 in some form, based on game differential. And then if you come from the 1 and 2 side, you'll be seeds 4 through 6, no matter what your game differential is. Because I think one of the important things is, say you are a team that comes from the 1 and 2, and so I think that some people will have a question of like, well, shouldn't it just be game differential like at that point at 2 and 2? Well, they're going to have an easier opponents like at that point. Like at, say you're 1 and 2 or 0 and 1, your opponent is technically easier than a player that just came through a 2-1 round. Say you're a 2-0 team and you squeaked by in both rounds, right? 3-2, 3-2. Or even like a 3-1 and a 3-2. So you have a +3 game differential. Then you go up against like an NRG and they just clap you. And they just go 3-0, 3-0, 3-0. And then you're like, well, we just got swept. There goes all our game differential. We're going back down to this 2-1 round at 0 game differential because they played NRG. Well, some other team sitting at 1-1's playing Vibrance over there, because I know Vibrance is a hot topic. And they're like, well, this is an easy win. No offense, Vibrance. So they get a 3-0 win there, and now they catapult up to the number 1 seed of the 2-1s. It's basically there to protect the hard matchups in that 2-0 round to still have a top 2 seed at that point. That's basically how it all works out. It's not really much else. If anyone has any questions, I'll answer them. So the main difference between being ranked 16 and 17, 16 gets shoot, yes. So 17 only gets one chance, yes. So basically, there had to be a cutoff somewhere. So again, these are my words, not the esports team's awards words, but basically, so what it seems like is they want protection for the higher seeded teams, like, the BDSs, the Vitalities, but it's also like, how do you just auto-invite teams to a regional? Because, again, there was no rules at the end of the last season of, like, keep 2/3 to ensure a Regional 1 spot. There was no rules like that, so everyone's just making roster moves however they want, which is perfectly fine. But then it's like, well, we still want to have, like, some protections in there. We don't want everyone going through an open. So you have to have a cutoff line somewhere, right? So I guess they want to do top 16, and then you can narrow that down to 8 to see who goes in, and then those 8 teams will fall down and play the teams from the open side. Now, to play a argument where, like, I don't really like the argument of, like, well, the team that's ranked like 15th or 16th, they now have 3 extra lives, right? It's like, yes, they have 3 extra lives against the best teams in Europe, while the other side has 1 extra life versus no one that's good in Europe at all, right? Or not like no one that's good, but you're a high seed. It's like you have 1 extra life. You're playing teams that are nowhere near the quality of like the top 8 of Europe or the top 12 in Europe. So, sure, yes, one side has 3 extra lives. One side has 1 extra life. They can obviously just qualify right through, and that is still a huge advantage. But I think a lot of people are like, well, if you're good enough and you're a 17th seed, you should easily make it through the open and just go into that next bracket. And if you think the other team's bad enough, well, they're very likely not going to win that Swiss anyway, and then they'll go in and play each other like in that new Swiss format or whatever. Now, again, like I still think it's a huge advantage being a 15th or 16th seed, but at the end of the day, more times than not, those guys should meet in that following Swiss. So, yes, it's 3 extra lives, but it's like 3 extra lives versus a gladiator with full armor, and you're going in naked, versus you're the gladiator with full armor, and you're just battling naked people, and you have 1 extra life. That's basically how I see it. But, yeah. But, again, there has to be a cutoff somewhere, right? Like, if they want to do, like, a performance-based net of safety, I would say, for some of these teams where it's like, all right, we'll give you a little bit, but you still have to earn it, which I think is fine. But yeah, so that's how the Swiss will work. It'll be a lot easier to understand. Teams will know who they're going to play based on their performance and their performance alone, and I think that'll help pro players more where they don't really like the RNG aspects, I assume. Personally, in Swiss, I like RNG because I think that's kind of like the point of Swiss, of like to try and get varied matchups, especially like early where we have seeds, but we don't actually know how good these teams are. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. I still think it's a pretty good format all in all. So we'll see who makes it out in these qualifiers. So once again, there's a Swiss qualifier. The top 16 teams will go down to 8. Those 8 will go to Regional 1. Then we will get 8 teams from the open qualifiers. They will play the 8 teams that lost in the first Swiss. They'll play another Swiss. And we will determine the last 8 teams that make it to Regional 1. So, tomorrow, I believe, are the games for the top 16. That is a great preview, a great preseason event almost for Regional 1, because very likely 90% of that field is going to be the same going into Regional 1, right? Because you would expect probably most of those teams will then advance that loss in the first Swiss, will advance through the open stage 1 as well. So, it's going to be a good preview of seeing where teams are, and then we'll see if there's any big surprises, any big 3-0s happening. And then I'm not sure exactly how the first regional is seeded. Maybe it's seeded based on where they finished on that Swiss performance. I'm not actually positive of that yet, so we'll see how that all plays out. But that is the difference between Old Swiss and New Swiss. Old Swiss, some RNG elements, some initial seeding. New Swiss, completely performance-based. But after round 1, it's all performance-based unless you tie. So you got to keep that in mind. So the protections wear off a lot quicker. So that's what we got coming out. I hope you guys enjoy the Swiss. Hopefully a lot of teams do some team streams for North America tomorrow. I assume Europe, I guess, would be the following Friday. And that would probably be at the same time, or maybe not the same time. It would probably be the Europe Swiss and then the NA actual RLCS show would happen like almost back to back, which would be kind of cool. So I'd definitely come check that out. But RLCS season is back. It's back, baby, and I'm excited. So definitely come check that out. All right, so that's going to do it for that, for the Swiss talk. Hopefully there's no questions. Let me see if I see any other. Too many just bad teams get a free pass deep into last season. I'm trying to think of, like, who got free passes, Stacks? All right, come on, Stacks. I want to hear it, Stacks. Who got free passes? Because like I'm trying to think of, so last season was different too, because like now actually there's more protections for the entire season. If you are like, if you do good in fall split, you actually have a lot of protections going into winter and spring, because top 8 will get auto invites to every regional, and that's based on full RLCS points. Last split, it was just based on that split alone, and that's it. So I feel like last season was more of like, you need to be ready immediately. And obviously that could help if you were just a hot Regional 1 team. It would definitely help you. But I don't know if there was too many free passes, Stacks. We'll go into DM, Stacks, all right? For that. But yeah. Tiebreakers Waterfall, I'll show you here. I think I still have it up. Yeah. So this is basically how it works really quick at the end here. Swiss rules for matchups. High seed plays lowest possible seed without rematches. Then the seeds are determined by 3 tiebreakers, all performance-based. Where you enter the round from, so upper side or lower side. We'll take round 3, for example. There's 8 teams at 1-1. The top 4 seeds will be the teams that came from the 1-0 side. The bottom 4 seeds will be from the 0-1 side. Then game differential will determine where you're seated in that grouping. And then it'll go down to where we began the day. If you were seeded 1, you're going to win all tiebreakers. If you were seeded last, you're going to lose every single tiebreaker. So that's only if game differential is tied. And then, yeah, just high seed plays lowest seed possible without any rematches, and we go from there. Team Liquid. What free passes did... okay, never mind. I know what you're talking about. Okay, you're talking about because of RLCS Season 9, how long they got the free invitationals to regionals. Okay, that makes more sense. That makes a lot more sense. I've completely forgot about that, but you are completely correct, Stacks. So we'll just throw Team Liquid on blast here. Sorry, Team Liquid, but now you got to earn it. Now you got to earn it the entire time. So even if you're BDS, it doesn't matter. You still got to earn it, BDS. And I do... All right, so... Now I get where you're coming from, Stacks. I agree with you 100%. I do like this system better of like, it's only this season. There's no but there's no handouts anymore. So, yeah, I agree. Stacks is a beautiful man. Beautiful, beautiful man. And he'll be joining us on the RLCS show, so you won't want to miss it next week. Twitch.tv/Rocket League. We're going to call this video here. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to cut this out from Twitch and YouTube. Obviously, it was on Twitch. You can see the chat. But that will do it. I love you all.